A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Well, depending on your age, you might be thinking about manners. And if you're a younger person, you might think older people have a different set of manners, perhaps, than the sort of manners or etiquette that I might have. Let's get an insight or two from genuine research that comes out of McCrindle Research. They've been talking about etiquette and surveying people to find out their attitudes. Grant Dusting is a social researcher with McCrindle Research. He's joining us. Hey, Grant, welcome along to 2020.
Hi, Neil. Great to be with you. Thanks.
Grant, when we talk about manners, when we talk about social etiquette, these things are important, but it does seem to be that things are changing generationally. What are your overall insights?
Yeah, definitely things are changing, Neil. And this kind of topic is right up our alley at McCrindle as social researchers. We use that term really to describe, we love studying how people are changing, how society is changing, and how people interact. And a lot of these things, there's demographic trends like the aging population and cultural diversity, things that I'm sure have been talked about on this show before. But this is one that's definitely one of those social trends, which when we talk etiquette and manners, then it's much less tangible and much more, these are unwritten rules, unwritten guideposts to how society functions that we're talking about here. So it was fascinating for us to do a study on this, to survey Australians across the nation, to uncover, well, how do the different generations interact when it comes to etiquette, manners, and what are the expectations, and how is that changing?
Immediately, I think of parents and children, but it might be parents and families. It might perhaps vary the age of parents. Give us your thoughts here on those generations and how you think that the etiquette or the manners of those generations has been changing. Perhaps start with the oldest among us, maybe the baby boomers. Where do we go from here? Yeah,
so we wanted to get some data to find out. Well, we kind of hear and people talk about changing attitudes to manners, and maybe some manners which are not being picked up or passed on. So we wanted to quantify that. So some of the etiquette that we focused on and found through the study is that our baby boomers are more likely to be doing things like waving to another driver when they let them merge into traffic. They're more likely to be returning their shopping trolley when they've done their shopping at the supermarket and in the car park there. More likely to respond with their attendance to an event that they're invited to. And more likely to avoid using swear words in conversation compared to younger generations. So younger generations being at the bottom end, our Gen Zs, who are just the youngest in high school, but the youngest adults being in their higher education studies and early in their working lives, through to our Gen Ys, also known as millennials, and then our Gen Xs too. So we found that across those metrics, we could say it's the baby boomers who are most committed to showing etiquette than the younger generations is what we found through the study.
And because these things are passed on usually generationally, has there been some sort of a gap, or has there been some disruption that you might have discovered so far as that older generation and perhaps some of these things that haven't filtered through in the way we might think would be a good thing?
Yeah, it definitely changes. So take, for example, waving to another driver when they let you merge into traffic. I'd be interested how many of our listeners would do that. I'm sure probably many of them would, being the lovely people that they are. So we found 9 in 10 baby boomers, so 90%, say they would always wave to another driver when they let them merge into traffic. And we can contrast that down to, say, Generation Y, only 71% said they always wave to someone. So, and when we ask that question that you're leading me to, why? Well, society has changed a lot in the last few decades, and the population's increased a lot. So we've got a lot bigger cities. If people living particularly in our capital cities around the nation, a lot bigger cities, a lot more traffic, people a lot more time poor and stressed. So no doubt these kind of factors play into those kind of common courtesies, which in the past were considered, well, this is what you do, this is a kind gesture to do. But today, still a lot of people are doing those things. But I think when push comes to shove and the busyness of life and people are stressed driving from place to place and hopefully sticking to the speed limit, some of those niceties can unfortunately be the ones to give way when those pressures come. So I think that does reflect some of the changing times, and particularly just the pace of life for a lot of people. And it might be that people do want to be kind and considerate, but those things get squeezed out as they're busy and stressed.
So is it the case, can you identify that some younger generations have become less courteous? And whatever that disruption might have been there, some might even say it's not just about courtesy, it's actually about rudeness on the road, or even things that might grow into road rage. And then there's always that thought that maybe if I am going to be communicating with other people on the road, that somehow or other something might be taken out of context and go out of control, and there might be violence. Is there any sort of thought here that you have around the things that might have caused such a change?
Well, I think there's a few things at play here, because we're talking social etiquette, social norms. I mentioned there maybe some of the factors that are some of the changes in people's lives and lifestyles that do influence their behaviour, and that's across the generations. Also, it's when it comes to these etiquettes and norms, it does rely on them being passed down, because these things are those social things which are not written down, not necessarily taught in a classroom in school, but things that would usually be passed down from parents or grandparents or trusted people around. And so it's for the things that any of us feel are important social etiquettes, it is really on us as individuals to say, well, actually, these are things that we consider helpful for us to function well as a society, and therefore things that we want to pass on. And so it does, I think a lot of these things do rely on families passing them on, parents to their children. So potentially some of those things are not being done, the data might suggest, or maybe not given the same importance. So that's the factor. I think another factor is that etiquette, because it is about social norms, as times shift, so do the things that people place importance on. For example, now with just the digital age that we live in, it's there would be a whole set of kind of digital or online social media etiquettes that were not considerations for the baby boomers, for example. But actually, with the younger generation spending so much time online, there's going to be a whole set of unwritten rules about how you should engage online and what's kind and courteous. So I think maybe at a headline level, this data shows that it seems that the younger generations are less considerate in terms of etiquette, but equally it could be said that the kinds of etiquettes that they might focus on are different. And we do have one example from the study, because we asked people, when you're hosting someone for dinner or for a meal at your house, do you ask them about their dietary requirements? Do you check in? And actually, it was the youngest generations, Gen Z, who were most likely to say that they always check dietary requirements before they cater for someone, compared to the baby boomers. So that's one example where things like dietary requirements, whether it's gluten-free or lactose intolerant, those kind of things, it's much more on the radar for the younger generations today because of the world that they've been shaped in. So that's one way that they're actually, you could say they're being more courteous, because that is more of a norm for them, and it's kind of an understood thing that's the nice thing to do. So I hope that goes away to answering that. I think, society changes, the things that we do change, and so the different priorities change as well.
So the context of our courtesy has changed from generation to generation, and you very adequately point that out. It leads me to think about what we in Christian circles call a golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And we hope that's something that's passed down from generation to generation. We've got those examples in the Old Testament times of passing on issues around belief and history. And something that extends into our current generations, the responsibility on parents to be able to pass on values as well as faith to our children. Do these sorts of things go hand in hand, do you think? What are your thoughts around that sort of thing?
Well, I think that's a great observation, Neil, and absolutely agree with you there. I think the things that individuals, say parents, for example, believe in and are important. It's essential that we are intentional about passing those on, and because as the culture around us changes, as individuals we may not have much control over that, but what we do have control over is the people in our direct circle. Well, what influence are we having on them? What traits, what characteristics, what values are we encouraging and instilling in them? So I would encourage all of our listeners, that is something that each of us can take some personal responsibility for, to make sure that those things that we hold dear, the values, get passed on, because we can't rely on society necessarily. Society might have a different set of values, and those will change over time too. So I absolutely agree. I think that's essentially important for everyone.
And no doubt, while we're talking generational difference, there's likely to be difference too, perhaps from the city to the bush, or even from community to community, as to how those values look and how they're being passed down. And we might have high aspirations for how those values might be passed on to a new generation or to others who might be in our circle of influence. But there's not always guarantees. Things are changing. Hey, for listeners who want to explore this a little more, is there a resource on the McCrindle website that listeners can download around this sort of thing? Or if it's not this particular one, because it's fairly new what we're talking about, but is there other resource that listeners might be able to access?
Yes, absolutely. We've done a big exploration of the different generations in Australia today and society, and how they engage in the world differently, how they have different values. So we released a report not too long ago called The Generations Defined. Listeners can find that on the McCrindle website, or simply probably by searching in their search engine McCrindle Generations. Come across that. We've got not only the full report, but we've got some infographic summaries of the different generations, so you can see at a snapshot the baby boomers and the Gen Zs and the Gen Y and the Gen X, how they're all different. So yes, for listeners who are interested in that, potentially who are in leadership roles and leading across the generations, hopefully that can be a helpful resource for them as well.
A resource called Generations Defined, and you'll be able to find that at mccrindle.com.au. Grant Dusting is a social researcher with McCrindle's. Grant, thanks so much for a great insight today on 2020.
Oh, pleasure to be with you, Neil. Thank you.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.